Okay, so we're going to start off today with setting margins and indenting text. Now for the most part, I think most of you know how to set the margins in Word, but just to take a quick look at that, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, if you want to change the margins on a page, you go to the page layout ribbon. And the page layout ribbon will get us to a point where we can actually change our margins in whatever way we want. Now, there's several options available using the page setup tab. For our purposes right now, margins are very straightforward. You click on the margins tab and you can change them to something that is kind of a default. So in this case, you've got normal, narrow, moderate, wide, and mirrored. Or you can set it to a custom margin. And simply click on that button and it will bring up a dialog box that allows you to change the top, left, bottom, and right. So at this point in time, that's pretty straightforward. We're going to leave the margins in this document alone. If you do want to change margins in a document, it's very straightforward from the page layout. The other thing I wanted to talk about quickly before we move on to setting the indents and creating indents is that anytime you have the ribbon up, you notice that on a lot of the tables, on a lot of the ribbon sections, you have this little arrow at the bottom. And you can see it there, for example, you can see it there, you can see it there. These little arrows help us by bringing up a dialog box anytime we click on them. So for the older versions of Word, when you clicked on one of the toolbars, this is what you saw. In the new version of Word, they've tried to eliminate the clutter and the need to use the menu system, and they've created all that stuff on the menus, or on the ribbons, sorry. The new versions of Word, in Word 2007 and Word 2010, the newest version, which we're not using, they have given us this dialog box access, so we can now break out into the dialog boxes. And we're going to be using that fairly frequently when we're doing our editing. So now on to indenting text. So to indent text, I've got a document up here called DTP Workshop, and it's going to help us a lot in the next little while, kind of looking at different editing techniques. And what I want to do is I want to indent a section down here. We've got a section that talks about the schedule of the conference that this document is talking about, and we want to break it down. We want to indent the left hand side and the right hand side so that it looks like it's centered out a little bit more. In order to do that, there's two ways of making sure you indent. One is being in the paragraph that you want the indent to actually take place. So we're going to indent this here, and as long as I'm somewhere in this paragraph, the indent will get set to this paragraph. So moving on, I want to indent this paragraph. So the paragraph menu is the place I want to be. You can set indents by simply using this indent, decreasing and increasing indent, but a better way and a more thorough way to work through it is to actually open up the paragraph dialog box. In here you'll see two sections, indents and spacing and line and page breaks. Right now we're working with indents. So we're going to create an indent, and you can look down here, it talks about indenting. And we're going to do a left indent, and we're going to add 1/2 inch to the indent. And you'll notice down here the preview shows you exactly what that's going to look like. And then we'll also add 1/2 inch to the right hand side. So now you can see that that's what the right side looked like. If we click on OK, you'll notice now that the networking breakfast paragraph has now indented from the left and from the right. And you'll also notice that when you're inside this paragraph, you can actually see up here the left indent and the right indent. When I move down to another paragraph that hasn't been edited, you'll notice that the indent markers move out to the edges of the page again, or out to the edges of the margins actually, in this case. So I want to do the rest exactly the same, so all I need to do is, the second way of making sure you're indenting properly is to actually highlight all of the text that you want indented. So in this case we want all of this indented. Again, go to the paragraph dialog box, choose a left indent of 1/2 inch, choose a right indent of 1/2 inch. Click OK. Now, one of the things that just came to my mind when I was showing you this is that sometimes if you're using a version of Word that's a newer version of Word and you've maybe not changed some of the settings, you might notice that when you do go into the paragraph and you go into this indentation, it's not actually measured in inches, it's measured in centimeters or it's measured in pixels. There's a really simple way to go in and change that. And each document can have its own settings. So we're going to actually go in and take a look at that just so that you can see where you would change that, just in case yours doesn't match up with this. And if you go into the Microsoft toolbar, which is the Office button up here, you click on that, and then you can see that you'll have an option for Word options down here. Click on Word options, go into Advanced, and then if you scroll down, you have all kinds of advanced options to set in Word. One of them is display. And display is where we want to change that. So here's the section that says show measurements in units of, and we can change it to centimeters, millimeters, points, picas. It doesn't really matter. Now the standard for most documents when you're editing is to use inches. If you are a little more metric, you can use centimeters or millimeters, that's your choice. But inches is pretty standard, so we're going to stick with inches. And then just click OK. So now we're working in inches. Had I changed that to centimeters, you would see that when I went in and tried to actually edit that document, and let's say I try to go to the paragraph again, and now you'll notice that indentation is actually set to centimeters. Okay, so now that's indenting text. We're going to move on and look at a different type of indexing. Another way to create indents is using bullets. And again, this is probably something that you're fairly familiar with, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, but it's pretty straightforward how to create a bulleted list. You can see here we got a list of items that we want to bring. If we wanted to bullet that or indent that with bullets, because it's a list, we can bullet that and simply go up to our paragraph and again choose the bullets. If we wanted to format those bullets to make them look a little different, we can go into the drop down box here and pick a different type of bullet. You can see that it previews that for us while we're hovering over, or we can actually define a new bullet and go into that. We won't get into too much more about bullets. There are two other types of bullets that I'd like to take a look at. One is called a first line indent, and the other one is called a hanging indent. So first line indent is when the first line of a paragraph is indented. You see this typically when people are writing books. You always see basically a first line indent that kind of delimits the page or delimits the paragraph for the individual. So we're going to create first line indents on all of these three paragraphs. And it's as easy as highlighting the text. Again, remember, you can actually be in the paragraph that you want to edit, or you can highlight all of the paragraphs that you want to edit. In this case, we want to edit all three. And again, going into our paragraph dialog box, and when you look at indentation, we're going to go to a special indent. And in this case, it's going to be a first line indent. And if we just click on the first line, and it asks us how much we want to indent by, you can see that right now it's 1.27 centimeters. Obviously, I haven't changed it back to inches, which I'll do in a minute. But this is what our first line indent will be. If we click OK, now you can see that all of the first lines of each one of the paragraphs has been indented. So that's our first line indent. The second type of indent is called a hanging indent. And a hanging indent is kind of the opposite of a first line indent. First line indent indents the first line, and all other lines are lined up to the left margin. A hanging indent leaves the first line of the document to the left, and everything else is hanging. Now I'm going to show you that through a different so here we are in a separate document, and we're going to show you the hanging indent. So you can see we've got kind of a listing here of the different lessons that are available, and we want to separate out the different days. Right now it looks kind of jumbled. We'd like to organize this a little bit better. So again, keeping in mind that anytime you want to highlight something or anytime you want to use something, you simply click and drag. So we're going to highlight this whole section. We're going to create a hanging indent. So we click on the paragraph tab, we look at the special, go to a hanging indent, click OK, and you'll notice that the hanging indent shows up. Now I'm going to change it back to inches here real quick. Okay, so right now we've got a hanging indent, and you'll notice here that it's indented it, but it still kind of looks a little bit mucked up, and we want to kind of line it up properly. So one of the other things you can do with any indent is that if you've got the paragraph highlighted and you want to change where the indent actually is located, you can actually go up and drag the indent bar across where you want to go. And one of the nice things about this is when you click and hold on the indent, you can see a line that runs down the page, and that kind of shows you where the indent is going to end up. Well, we're going to move this one over to 2 inches, and we're going to line everything up together. So now you can see it's organized this very nicely, where the different dates are, or days, are lined up to the left, and then there's a hanging indent on each paragraph that lines the different instruments that they're going to have lessons for. There. Okay, so again, that's simply highlighting the section, choosing the paragraph tab, using a special indent, in this case a hanging indent, clicking OK. You can set the indent size right now, and right now you'll notice the indent's at 2 inches because we did adjust it to that. Or you can wait and adjust the indent later by choosing this hanging indent. And you'll notice that when you do choose a hanging indent, when you mouse over it does say that it's a hanging indent.